All right, so I'm going to ask you a question I already know the answer to, but did you see the new Louis Theroux documentary, Inside the Manosphere?
Yes, and I watched it because I know this is important to you and a lot of the topic that you were writing about. So, as your friend, I watched it, and instead, what happened was I sent you a series of very angry voice memos because I found it absolutely infuriating. I had to take breaks watching it because I was mad. Yeah, I just.
Yeah, I appreciate you watching it for the sake of me. I just appreciate you watching it. It is a fascinating documentary. There's been a handful of like criticism about it and a lot of like critiques about its lack of depth or even its like neglecting the idea of like women's rights inside of this. Honestly, I really did like the documentary. I thought it was like really, really well done. But I do also have a realization, a personal realization, that this movie's not for me or you. You know, you and I are above the high. We're a higher level than this audience is supposed to be. So I think as an entry point to the conversation, the documentary is fantastic. But I also think it leaves enough room in there for people who should rightfully be furious at the subject matter, especially the fact that on top of the idea that the manosphere has become culture, that we have to be subjected to more of it. And so there, that's something that I know the I really appreciated your angry voice memos, which also are nice and helpful because they are in voice and not text, so they can't be held against you. But your opinions on it are correct. I think that any woman that watches this film has to see it as a way of amplifying these misogynist voices in a world where the misogynist voices are already normalized. And it becomes fairly like dangerous propaganda in that way too.
Yes.
As you noted, for me, is that the last year, the whole year of 2025, I worked on a book project, which now I kind of regret not just turning it into content. I was courted by an agent to write a book proposal about my expertise in far right extremism and the manosphere. And I've been studying it since 2016 or 17. And so I kind of really understand it from like its core structure. The manosphere isn't born in 2016 and 17. And just to be clear, the term manosphere is a term that connects to the entire media ecosystem that is men's rights movements and men's rights movement adjacent, which means it includes everybody from, as Louis Theroux explains in the film, the non-extremist to the extremists. And so in his film, he focuses on the extremists, or at least what I would consider like the 97th percentile of extremists, because there are unfortunately people far worse than the people he focuses on. But the rest of them like are fairly banal and fairly accessible to most people, not just men. And I'm talking about like Joe Rogan. I'm talking about Aiden Ross. And I'm talking about like the podcasters that basically are just podcasters, but they sit with inside the manosphere because that's their market, I guess is the best way to think of it. And then one thing that I think we should talk about today is the fact that the manosphere isn't just men. It is subsisted and both complicit and structured by the women participants as well, not just the women participants like formerly Lauren Southern in the late 2010s, but also the partners of a lot of these people who are kind of stuck in a situation where they really unfortunately just have to be the piece, the object of study of the people, or the object of, how do I say this right? The object to these men. I mean, they've become fully objectified, so that they're part of that problem too. And so, like I said, I put this book proposal together. It was called Angry Boys Among Us, How the Manosphere Became Culture and What We Could Do About It. And it wasn't selected because of several reasons. One is a crowded field, because a lot of people are writing about it right now. It's become to a head. And it's also, I didn't have a platform, which is part of why we're working on this as well. And I don't regret it not coming out, but I do think there are gaps in people's knowledge about this subject matter that don't let them realize that like people like JD Vance and Pete Hegseth, they're also included very intensely inside the manosphere. And I think revealed in this documentary, which I think most people found shocking, was the role of Barron Trump. So that was fascinating to me because I think of all people in the administration, it's him, not Trump, that are more of the manosphere people. And in the end, I really did find the documentary good, but of course, it really doesn't give us any tools of what to do about this situation.
It does not. It just leaves you with a lot of anger and it left me with a lot of anger and a lot of feelings. And, I've done research. I was researching it afterwards after I'd taken some space from viewing it. And there's a ton of feedback on it from, you know, Louis Theroux's approach being a little too soft, which how else do you want to facilitate that conversation? Because while these men put forth a very aggressive, and we can talk about it, but they put forth a very aggressive front, but when actually softly confronted about the foundation of their beliefs, you can see it in several points of the documentary. They can't handle it. They can't process it. They can't have a conversation about it, and they shut it down. There's also tons of conversations out there that I've seen. Is a man qualified to have these conversations about sexism, which I have a lot of thoughts on? And then, on the same side, then the women's participation in it, like crazy to me. But then also like a ton of stuff to your point about who the actual audience is for this. There's a few articles out there that's talking about you need to monitor your kids, what your kids are looking at on social media. There's not a clear action point, but obviously the internet is full of.
Yeah, fortunately we do have the space to critique it and talk about it. So it does create a conversation. This is a conversation starter. This is like, first off, the framing device is at the beginning. So it tells you who the audience is for. He says at the very early part of the movie, when one of the men say to him, they're actually shocked. And this is like our background of like having cameras and being television people. Like we kind of see through this, but a lot of people don't have this experience.
I normally train a little bit earlier in the day. I like to start my day off working out, doing hard things. Who are you talking to? What, do I not talk to them? Don't talk to him. Talk to you.
When you walk in with a documentary crew or even like a television crew, it's big gear. This isn't like a laptop on a stand. This is like an ENG camera on your shoulder with mat boxes, battery packs, audio devices, a lighting guy holding a lighting kit, another boom operator. And so when he walks in, he says, wow, this is a big camera. And he says, no, this is the real deal. We're not YouTubers. And that was probably the most, because, okay, let's just reframe this for the people who are watching this thing. That to me was the most angering part, because I already know about the rest of the Manosphere. And the angering part for me is the fact that like he is pejorative about the idea of YouTubers. So he's framing it for an older audience who is also in that same thought prep space of like, these are just people having fun on the internet. And as you know, as we've talked about multiple times, and anybody who's read my work for the last decade or so knows that like that is my biggest problem with critical internet studies, is that you can't constantly be saying like the internet is a problem and then just being like, oh, the internet's another place. You can't really have it both ways. And we talked about that, I think, on the first episode we did this on, so it is, to me, when he frames it that way, we know immediately, well, he's not talking to us. He's talking to people who are afraid. And that's where that whole, you need to monitor what your kids are watching. Of course you do. It's not just because the Manosphere exists, but because the internet is open. It's everything all at once. And so it's just one of those like reminders that's in there. And so I liked the idea that he at least offers that shape at the beginning, no matter how pejorative I felt about it. But I think by having that knowledge, it's like a lot of the criticism that came about the film then don't acknowledge that the movie's not for them. So we really have to reframe our discussion about how we discuss this with like adults and young people around it. And especially, I think the one thing that was left out of the film overall that made me kind of upset was the fact that there's no perspectives of what the young woman would do when they come across this type of content. We get tons and tons of examples of what happens with young men. You even get to see like the outcome of Sneeko when his little fans, teenagers, these boys come up to him and they start saying how much they hate women. He goes, what did I do? And it's like, yeah, man, you can't like build this house of misogyny and not expect the boys to become misogynists, so that at least there's a reveal in there, because I think a lot of people are like head in the sand types. They just don't want to know that this is a reality. And unfortunately, this is a very real thing.
Yes. It was one of the things that was so baffling to me watching it was there's this, I feel, a conflicting dichotomy with these men specifically, because on one hand, you see them treat these girls as their objects, right? How many of them have these women that are around them where they talk about one-sided monogamy and they're running around in the skimpiest bathing suit, like, please. And the women are participatory in it, which is a thing I will get into in a minute because it infuriates me. But also then you see how these boys react when their mothers are around. One of them even says, oh, my mom doesn't approve of any of this. He has that whole little thing. And I'm like, what the, what? How is this both? So to the women's point, something I don't think you mentioned it, but no one talks about how the women are participating in this. They are getting something out of participating in this. They have to, because I don't believe in my gut that you would participate in it for any other reason. And a few of them do kind of talk about that. And there is a side of, women that just, wants money and nice things and to be taken care of, I think is at the root of that. They want to feel taken care of. And that innate need is being taken advantage of in a way that feels real close to domestic violence. Like, I'm not going to say like violence, right? But that kind of manipulation that happens because obviously they want enough money to feel secure, whatever that amount is. That's different for everybody. Some people want to be taken care of in a remote cabin in the woods and never have access to the internet, and that's great. And some people want the cars and to live in Miami,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's infuriating to watch these women participate in it because as someone who's slightly conservative, but yet a feminist, I sit in the middle. It's both to me. How could you let yourself get into this situation where that's the reputation you have? And it makes me think a lot about Pamela Anderson. I don't know if you ever watched her documentary.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She never once thought when she was young the impact of what she was doing and how that would affect her two sons. And she says that, and she just wasn't thinking far enough ahead, but she was objectified and taken advantage of and participated in it because it brought her fame, notoriety, money, all of the attention that she wants. You see some girls are very visible in public, and then you have that guy from Louisiana who said that he will never, he's not showing her. She doesn't, which felt very conservative, not in a healthy, good way. Like, I think it's hard to talk about it in language that feels not extremist.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of my angry voice.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong about the sense of violence though. Like from my studies, it doesn't have to be overt violence to be violent. Misogyny is violence. Anti-feminism is violence. It is an intent. A lot of these men, remember, they're now adults on this documentary, but they grew up. It's revealed towards the end of the documentary, as most documentaries about internet culture do. They reveal their younger selves on the screen. And a lot of these guys came up via the internet. And if you think they came up in a vacuum, it's impossible. These guys came up through incel forums. They came up through forums where women's violence isn't just normalized, but desired. Is a background of incel culture and a lot of the stuff that isn't mentioned in this documentary. And I give it a pass for this. And the reason I give it a pass is because this goes deep and it's hard to explain in a short amount of time. The documentary is a fairly tight hour and a half, and it really does pass very quickly. Like it feels like a TV show more than a documentary. But one of the things that's unsaid, that is unfortunately unsaid, is that the shape of incel culture is about their deep feelings that come from like literally the 1990s. So this is like a 30-year-old belief system of the men's rights activist movements, in which women, third wave feminism, and potentially Tumblrification, fourth wave feminism has succeeded. I'm talking about in their head. They are certain that feminism succeeded so well that men are the oppressed class. That's what they feel. That is a true belief. I know, yes, that's the correct response, because obviously they're wrong. You and I live in a real world. And so does that probably everybody watching this piece of content, unless they're a troll who's going to react to this. But if you're living in the objective consensual reality, that's obviously a falsehood. But it's very easy to say that to young men who feel disenfranchised by the system, not by women, by the system that has disenfranchised them or like excluded them from prosperity. Their aspirations, just as young women's, are not incentivized as much as they may have been in the 90s and early 2000s before the financial crisis. So rather than approach it through like the reality of what's going on in disenfranchisement, what you're talking about is that the women in this case are actually now part of this marketing plan. The incentive now is not just profit, but attention, but also it's the market. It's a marketplace. So you're actually looking at the visible output of a new marketplace that isn't being curtailed. And in some ways, and I can't speak to it directly from like the male perspective, but is propped up by some women participants who may feel some sort of benefit that comes from this, because there are benefits. It's not just monetary, it is belonging. People want to belong.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it, I mean, we've talked about it briefly in a few episodes, but they're the influencer, right? Everybody wants to be the influencer, and being associated with these men on the social channels brings them influence, and with that comes an association of power, wealth, prosperity, all the things that they want. you and I see it as a facade. It's a very glass house situation, and it makes me think of the women, like the wives of cult leaders, right? They obviously get something out of it. This whole manosphere, most of the guys in here feel very culty to me. And it just makes you think like, well, the wives of the cult leaders feel like they have prestige, like they have power. They're, the top woman. And man, is that just frustrating, because you and I both know real feminism is not the oppression of men.
Mm-hmm.
And that is
That's right.
never what it is.
Yep.
And so someone that feels very strongly in that belief that it is the elevation of both,
Mm-hmm.
to see that the manosphere is co-opted, that feminism is, anti-male, is just always incredibly infuriating to me.
Yeah, it's a fiction, and it's a very easily believed fiction, because when you're young, you don't have the experience that you have when you're older, obviously. Because what is that quote that I used to love to use? It's like, experience is the one thing you get 100% of the time immediately after you needed it. So they don't have it yet. And so without the contrast of experience, they're just going to hear these men who are in position. You're right. They're in positions of power. And whether it's a facade or not, and what isn't mentioned in the documentary is that a lot of the men of the Manosphere, like, he focuses on 3 or 4 major characters, but there's hundreds. And many of them, like, literally will go to like car dealerships and sit in their cars and like videotape it and pretend it's theirs. So it isn't just like, when you mentioned as a facade in like the metaphysical sense, it's actually a facade. Like, it literally exists solely for the camera. It doesn't exist in real life at all. But when you're a young person and your access point is the screen, like, it's going to look real. It's like that. A lot of my friends, we talk about the idea of like K-Fabe. Like, this was a very good documentary about K-Fabe. And she even mentions, I don't remember the woman's name. It was one of their partners. And she's like, oh, he's not really like this off the screen. And that's K-Fabe. That's like wrestlers. They don't go home and throw their children against the wall. They're people. But the idea of, like, right? Like, so these guys are like presenting themselves, their performance, but they've how do I put this? Unlike a wrestler where their muscles exist, right? Their muscles exist, but their personalities don't. These guys exist as women haters everywhere. Like, that is their thing. It's their brand. It's an actual brand. It's their NIL of existence. And so that becomes a problem, because it is hard for young people to see that without knowing the difference between what kayfabe is, or like when the guy like years ago was like, it's real to me, man. It isn't even a pretend to be real. Like, for these young men, it is real. Like, it isn't like a contrast. Like,
I feel like this is a conversation that I've been having a lot lately, but your whole persona point right there, I come from film and television, have a way to read anything that is produced. It's not reality. I've seen, well-respected actors play terrible people on screen, and I know they are not the character, which I feel is maybe something we're losing a little bit, because given the heated rivalry situation, which we're not getting into, but there's a literacy there that is missing for these younger generations to be able to understand that what you see on the screen is not reality. It's a story. And your point makes me think about a very famous comedian. I'm not going to name names. I view him very satirical, right? I don't take anything this man says seriously, because he is playing a character in his comedy shows and on his podcast. I've met the man several times in person. That is not who that person is. That is there is the persona that shows up on stage. There's the persona that makes the money, but the real person behind it is not this angry, screaming. It's a kind and considerate person. But I know that these younger generations don't, because to your point, their reality exists within this frame. So I could have a bunch of, JD Vance and Trump flags all over this office, as long as it doesn't sit in this frame.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because the reality is the frame. Yeah. And this is like, it's proven through like Clavicular and his idea of frame mogging. And like the term frame mogging is dual. Like that just means like outshowing somebody inside of your picture. But it's also his frame, his width of his shoulders that occupies the space. He's aware of the shape and his occupation of the space. So if somebody's bigger than him, it creates a problem for him, because he doesn't want to be taken out of the shape that he's presenting. Have you ever been to a restaurant or a cafe or anything where they have a special Instagram menu? Like a menu that's like
No, that's a thing?
Geez, all right, I'm about to introduce you to something horrible. There are, I don't know, maybe it's not in your region, I guess, I don't know, or you just haven't been to these terrible places. There are several restaurants and diners up here. I'm not going to name the restaurant just because I don't feel
No.
like getting them, that it's coming after me. But there was a diner in New York that has a literal section on their menu that's called Instagram favorites. And they are food that the way I could best describe this food is that it is disgusting. It is food designed specifically for the Instagram image. I don't know if it's consumable, and if it is consumable, it would most likely give you a stomach ache. It's like your type of like sandwich that would be like a burger with like mac and cheese on top with like 8 toppings, and it's bigger than reality. But the point of that is that the food is not food. There was also a trend on Long Island where you and I used to work. There was a trend about 2 to 3 years ago about the pickle sandwich. It was 2 pieces of pickle with the sandwich in between. So rather than bread, do you remember this?
I do. And it reminds me of the sandwich. Who had the sandwich where it was 2 pieces of fried chicken and then all the
Right. Yeah, that was KFC. It had like the whatever it was.
down?
But that becomes an adaptation to a point where you have to like really, if you're being a TV person and being somebody who used to produce, that is the ability for the consumer to create content. It's an excess point for the average consumer to be a content creator. And the point of that that's really important is that you can make an argument that like it's not food. It's not food because technically it is digital media that happens to exist on our side of the screen, but it only exists on our side of the screen temporarily because it's expirable. And it exists because it will present itself on camera. And I know that's kind of like heady or like academic, but the way I look at it is like clavicular and these Manosphere guys, they're not much different than a pickle sandwich. They are very much, they exist for the digital world. Their bodies might exist. They might have a beating heart on this side, but their sole existence is for the screen. So when you talk about the idea of like seeing a comedian and take off the act, you know, or a wrestler turn off the K-Fabe, this isn't the same for these guys. These guys are digital media. So they are as close as we can expect, like the idea of the Matrix, where they often like the Matrix is the system that we have to put down and we have to fight against it. And they don't realize they're the remainder. They're the dark Neo. They are the guy that exists as part of the system itself that is pooped out into our world. And we have to deal with them because they're both digital media and real at the exact same time, but primarily the Matrix. They are the Matrix.
No, it just, well, the idea of, you know, they're the excrement of the internet is so accurate. It's just so accurate. And it goes back and it harkens back to this conversation. Then what do we do about it? What do we do with the turds? Like as a society, right? Even our ancient ancestors learned that when you let waste in the streets, everybody gets sick.
Yeah.
And so, you know, plumbing and a waste system was invented. How do we flush out these turds? Because I can't think of a better way to describe it.
It's a good way to describe it because they are, I think your description is great. I've actually not thought of it that way, which is that they are poisoning society by their waste excrement. Like the fact that they exist poisons the rest of us. And again, the proof is in the documentary. It is a high budget documentary. It's Louis Theroux. He's one of the greats of documentary storytelling, telling a story about something that's fairly banal on the internet because it just is. But the fact it has subjecthood makes it part of our life. And now we have to deal with it. We're talking about it right now. It means that parents all over the country are dealing with it right now. And it becomes a conversation. The downside is Louis Theroux doesn't give us any tool set at the end of it to be like, all right, so now you know, that's cool. Congrats. Now you know about it. But we don't have a plunger for you. There's no way to push this back down the sink. There's no way to throw it out. There's no truck that's going to come by and pick it up. It just is part of your life. It is what it is. And so that is kind of like very kind of upsetting when you think of it. So now it's on the onus of the parents, like the parents and the guardians and the people to kind of like figure out the tool set. And the end of my book would have been like 4 chapters on what to do about it. It would have been about how do we handle the Manosphere? What do we do to counteract it or like counter program it for the very least? One part, the most accessible, is counter programming like this. The ability to talk about it in a sober way and discuss it in a way that helps other people see it and have a language for it. Because like even you and I, like in all of our years, we still struggle with words to describe this specific moment. So now what do parents do? So the second thing is like, Now that we know that young men are exposed to this content, and this content is fairly attractive because it does lead to the aspirational self, very simple tools to become slightly more, what is the like, slightly more. These tools allow these young men to ascend. That's the term they use. But like when they use that term, they're using an incel language that is the ascension above women. So they don't really, it's not really even about the success model. In other words, it's the same thing, the same model for young men that's always been there, which is like small gains, big results. And if you could achieve one thing, you could achieve other things. And that's why a lot of people, when they're stressed out, will do like a craft or a hobby or like cut the grass. It's because you get to see something get done. You know, a lot of what we do in our life is a struggle. It's not meant to be successful instantly. It's not supposed to be an outcome. This is the problem I have with like looks maxing and any of these like new manosphere types that are using a lot of steroids and drugs because they're taking shortcuts. They're getting to the ascension, so to speak, faster by these things, but they're guided by the older manosphere community. And when you interact with a young man or a young woman who's like aspiring and they find themselves disenfranchised, they turn towards these shortcuts rather than find out that the struggle is the path. You know, it's not the destination, but how do you know that as a young person? A lot of the tools that aren't explained in this is one, the counter programming. Two is that there is still social good opportunities that people can participate in. They can still do things that in the end resemble forms of mutual aid or help. And then the third one is like, there are skills that aren't inside of the screen. Like you can learn to cook. Like there's like, you can learn just small skills, small skills that are wildly beneficial later in your life. That I think the most common criticism I hear when I hear anything about the manosphere or incel behavior is like, if you really like, if their goal in the end is to get women, which honestly it isn't, we know it's a disguise for disliking women. But if the goal is that, learning how to cook is a good skill, like learning how to wash dishes, you know, there's small amount of things that can be enforced as a positive experience for a lot of people, not just gendered on men. These things are left out because we're talking about a documentary. We're talking about something that explains this. The problem then that comes from this, that I felt through it, and again, I thought this was a good documentary for its audience, not for me, is that it creates another version of uplift that they could do. Now they have a way of getting onto a bigger production and so forth. No matter how much at the end you get to see these men literally fall apart. Like these guys they're literally, it's amazing that they're role models to these guys because they're soft. Like you and I, when we were talking on their voice chats, these men, they fall apart at the first pushback. They also do something really strange that people don't often do, which is they are always on the defense. They're always like projecting their insecurities on everyone else. So it's easy to detect. And so I think that's like a parental tool or like a tool from a guardian or teacher is to detect the way in which confidence allows you to not have to act on the defense or project your fears onto other people. That tool set is really the biggest way to combat the manosphere, because that's what's missing from all of these men is it doesn't seem like anyone gave them the tools for that level of dealing with reality. You're
It
sighing a lot.
happens. I'm trying not to like, it's either like a deep sighs or just complete rage. But, you know, that was where I think the critique of Louis Theroux being soft on this, how else do you want him to approach it? But also, it was the most effective way to approach it because just a soft push on these guys, foundational pillars of being, they crumbled so quick to the point where like they would dismiss the women immediately. They stopped being able to make eye contact. Their whole grandiose, confident thing crumbled. The first guy he talks to, right? He spends the whole day with the guy. The next day, that guy won't even be around him, calls in like his buddy. He has to spend the whole day with his buddy and then pushes off the yacht party. Oh, I've got so many more important things to do. It's like, please. I expect that from a junior high kid.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very much that, what do they call it when you get stuck where you are? It's like when you get your first real big moment in your life and then get stuck there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wherever they were when they first consumed that content, that's where they stayed. And then it's raising this several generations now of men that are adolescents. Yeah. And then if you want to look at women's real problem with men as of lately, it's that they cannot find a man that is a partner for them because they're all still in junior high. So then, yeah. You know what I mean?
No, you're right. Yeah.
Increasingly difficult to find a partner because I need someone to help me take out the trash and do the dishes and, help me walk the dog. I need someone. Women are just
Yeah.
asking for basic things like that. And they're looking at a generation of men that are still 15 years old.
Yeah, they're emotionally and physically stunted. They focus on the parts of their body that are visible, not the strength, and that's another fascinating part. Like, there was a viral clip that went viral last week about Clavicular getting tagged in wrestling. And it always reminds me, like, he got knocked over and like easily taken down. And it's because he focuses on the aesthetic versions of muscle. He's the bodybuilding type, whereas the actual strength training doesn't look much like that at all. And emotionally, you're right. Because it's like there's a funny online theory right now that I refer to often, which is the everyone is 12 theory. And it's like, oh man, I want to be like on YouTube videos and do this. Of course you do, little buddy, because you're 12,
Yeah.
So it's there's this, and I can't imagine what it's like for women or young women or anybody to interact with men who are emotionally and physically stunted like this, because there is sort of like this class. It's the same way that boomers have this classical interpretation of the new media type of thing, is like, oh, they're just YouTubers, they're on the internet. But it's the same thing as like, there's a classical version of what is a caretaker gender wise too, not just to fall into traditional roles, but just the fact that traditional roles once existed. And to be let down in that way, to know that these men are like watching these clips and it's all about the clips and aspiring to clips, doesn't seem like it's a very valuable way of like figuring out even how to have a conversation with somebody, no less like expect them to do very basic chores around the house. So I understand that. And like, I we're not, this isn't the episode for this, but my college experience when I like fell down these rabbit holes and like became somebody who was like treated people poorly, I was a manipulator because of the red pill atmosphere that was around it. Like, I was fortunate enough to find out that it was a dead end. It doesn't lead anywhere. It literally is you could feel it stunting you. But I think the distractions that come from the screen and this constant reinforcement that these men keep giving these young men tells them that don't worry about it, because the next step is just around the corner. And really, they're just, as I explained to everybody, the Manosphere, what it promotes to young men of how to take advantage of women, they don't do that to women. They do that to other men. The Manosphere is about the male gaze. It is about manipulation of young men using the tactics they say they're going to use on women, but they use them solely on the men around them. And I cannot imagine what that feels to be a young woman and watch that.
I was so grateful not to find my spouse before dating apps were a thing, and to meet him in a real world environment and not have to deal with any of that.
Yeah, to be clear, dating apps, there's nothing wrong with dating apps, but I understand
They're
what you're
not.
saying. Yeah.
But
right.
I met him.
Yeah.
We saw each other in person, had a real conversation where we made eye contact and then decided this was for each other. But I see the youth and I see the struggles. You and I have both had students that like we had to work together to kind of do some deprogramming on.
And it's only now scaled up. When you and I were interacting with these students in the twins, we had a lot of tools that are to talk about. I think that post pandemic, well, it's not still pandemic, but like post fully online pandemic, fully remote world where everyone was on the internet all at once, there was no tool set to unpack that post event. And now we're like, basically, like you said, like the toilets are clogged. There is no way to get rid of this excrement. And now we're filled with it, and it keeps on piling up. And we as a society should not be blaming women to have to for them to clean it up. It is not a woman's responsibility to clean this up. This is on men. This is a project for men to get a handle on. And for every time I read one of these articles, like, until society or women do, I'm like, shut up. Like, that is not it. Like, you cannot, by continuing to place the blame on anyone other than these men, we're just consistently giving them the keys to scale this outward. The shape is constantly like a pyramid over and over again. And it could be a scheme. So yeah, these are my thoughts on this. And I did, like I said, like, just to wrap this up a bit, is that I did find the documentary good. I thought it was well produced and very illuminating. I just believe that we need to have the conversation that keeps on going. And this isn't just my study because of my past history or my lore that's attached to it, but because as an internet culture person, if you ignore this part of internet culture, you are doing a disservice to everyone that uses the internet and anyone who's curious about how we could talk about the internet.
I agree. I also think to a certain point, all of this is about becoming more media literate, understanding how to discern that information. And if it makes you uncomfortable. Like, part of literacy is being uncomfortable, because that being uncomfortable means that you've identified a value or a wall of some sort. So that uncomfortability is something that is essential to understanding what's
I
going on.
100% agree. I think media literacy gives us the ability to talk about uncomfortable things. If your first reaction to discomfort is avoidance, it's not going to do it. You are 100% right. This is about media literacy and literacies, just literacies, because to be able to read properly, and it's not just like text translating into images in your mind, it's like to read it contextually and to understand it in the world that we live in, and to make sure that other people feel like they have agency and choice. Literacy has to be increased, and it's a responsibility of really all of us. It's a collective responsibility.